If you ask the average student what they dislike about English classes, many will agree that it is grammar and punctuation lessons. As teachers, it can be equally frustrating when students don't know the proper rules by the time they get to high school. We hope that in this video, you will see that punctuation marks go beyond what their function is, and that by looking at their history and origin, students and teachers can gain an understanding that is logical and makes more sense on why they are used.
Doesn't the apostrophe get lonely, floating in his solitude?
The apostrophe is a punctuation mark used to indicate the omission of one or more letters from a printed word. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, an apostrophe is used in English to indicate possession. The practice ultimately derives from the Old English genitive case, the of case, itself used as a possessive in many languages. The genitive form of many nouns ended with the inflection es, which evolved into the simple s for the possessive ending. An apostrophe was later added to mark the omitted e. The apostrophe is different from the closing single quotation mark, usually rendered identically, but serving quite a different purpose, and from the similar-looking prime, which is used to indicate measurement in feet. The apostrophe has a long history in English language use. According to the Online Etymology Dictionary, use of the apostrophe was first recorded in English in 1533 to illustrate the turning away of an orator in speech to address some individual. By 1588, this mark was used to show the omission of a letter from a word. Its use fluctuated until the middle of the 1700s, when the apostrophe became more standard. Like the comma, the apostrophe is among the most misused punctuation marks in the English language, which is unfortunate because there are only two major uses of the apostrophe.
Apostrophes show possessive nouns like mom''s, which means something that belongs to mom.
Apostrophes fill in missing letters and contractions, which put two words together like don''T for do not. Apostrophes are used to take the place of letters that are left out of words, like when we abbreviate government and spell it GOV''T.
It should be noted that contractions should usually be avoided in formal writing. Also, when making possessive a word that already ends in s, the apostrophe is usually simply added after that s. Here are some guidelines for using apostrophes.
Don't use apostrophes with pronouns. Only write it''s if you're writing the contraction for it is. That also goes for whose. Don't use the apostrophe unless you're writing the contraction for who is.
There are many who wish to ban this punctuation from its current application. George Bernard Shaw, the famed dramatist, novelist, critic, and Nobel Prize recipient, once attempted to spearhead a movement to remove the possessive apostrophe from its use altogether. But this didn't happen. Perhaps people are afraid to appear ignorant of not using it at all, but using it incorrectly proves even worse. Just as there are people who would see the apostrophe gone from English usage, there are others who are on a mission to preserve and purify its use. The Apostrophe Protection Society of the UK is one.
The key to avoiding overuse in punctuation is to remember this saying, when in doubt, leave it out.
Quoth the raven,
nevermore.
Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door, quoth the raven.
Nevermore.
Why, you little...
In English, quotation marks are the form of punctuation used to indicate the beginning and end of a quotation. These are usually shown as double inverted commas at the beginning and the end of a quotation, or for a quotation within a quotation of single marks of this kind. Quotation marks as we know them emerged in the middle of the 16th century, but their ancestors were quite different. In the early days of typesetting, quotations were used to indicate the speaker. These marks were cut into metal type and heavily employed by printers of the day. Some editions of the Bible still exhibit this. Later, during the Renaissance, quotations were offset from the main body of the text in italics. Long quotations are still seen this way, like an indented italic paragraph without quotation marks. During the 18th and 19th centuries, they were still sometimes repeated at the beginning of each line of a substantial quotation. In early modern English, quotation marks were used to emphasize witty comments. They didn't perform their modern function to quote direct speech until around 1714. By the middle of the 18th century, single quotation marks or inverted commas were commonly used to denote direct speech. Quotes, quotation marks, or inverted commas define either quoted words or words used with special emphasis or significance. When they're identical in form, they are called vertical, straight, or typewriter quotation marks. If they're specifically left-sided, opening, and right-sided, closing, quotation marks, they're called typographic or curly quotation marks. The closing single quotation mark has the same form as an apostrophe, although their uses are very different. Air quotes are a form of body language in which one makes virtual quotation marks in the air while speaking. This photo illustrates the speaker's position with fingers flexed at the beginning and the end of the quoted phrase. The air-quoted words or phrases are customarily short, but may be longer to increase comic effect. These gestures, also known as finger quotes or ersatz quotes, indicate that the speaker is expressing irony, satire, euphemism, or sarcasm. They've been used since at least the 1920s, although in a slightly different form. The term air quotes seems to have been coined around 1989. The print cousin of the air quote is the scare quote, which popped into standard use in the 1950s. Scare quotes are quotation marks placed around a word or phrase from which the writer wishes to indicate that he or she approaches that word with skepticism or derision. Bunsnip.com offers these proper uses of quotations: quoting statements verbatim, referring to a word as the word itself instead of its meaning, to say so-called without using those words, signifying the title of an article, and to show that you really don't mean what you say. They also provide some common misuses of quotation marks, which include setting off a slogan or a trademark, and adding emphasis to a word or a phrase. Remember that enclosing quotation marks around single words or short phrases looks like scare quotes.
Surrounding words or phrases with quotation marks adds emphasis.